Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and salam. My name is Katarzyna. Welcome to MACFEST 2023. I'm a member of the MACFEST team, and today I'm joining you from quite sunny Derbyshire. So tell us where you're watching us from. Tell us in the chat. If you have any questions or any thoughts during the event, please share them with us, either in the chat or in the Q&A portal. Today, we've got one of the last two events for MACFEST 2023. And today's event is about complexity, contradictions, chaos. Very exciting event. And we're going to find out a little bit more about the title and what it means. And today's host is Ismael Lea South. He's a youth and community consultant who utilizes positive urban creative for engagement. He's a former rapper and poet with the rap reggae nasheed fusion group, Mecca to Medina. He's currently completing his new book, Memoirs of an Inner City Youth Worker. And the book should be released in November 2023. So as I said, please let us know where you're watching us from. Share your comments, your thoughts, any questions you might have. And on behalf of MACFEST, thank you so much for joining us on our events and for all your donations. They help us create all these wonderful events for you. And as you can see, a lot of them are free. So please keep in touch, keep an eye on Eventbrite, and stay subscribed to our newsletter to know about more events coming up next year, and any photographs and feedback we have from MACFEST 2023. We will be sharing a lot of that in the newsletter over the next couple of months. Do follow us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and also LinkedIn. And do use our hashtag #SpreadHoneyNotHate. So let's now have a question to our guest today, Ziauddin Sardar. He's an author. He's joining us from all the way from Malaysia. It's quite late over there, 9 o'clock, I believe. Welcome to MACFEST 2023. Thank you for joining us. You are an accomplished author, Zia. You wrote over 50 books. If you could please tell us a little bit more at the beginning about your author's life.
Well, the author's life involves a great deal of very hard work. But however, before you sit down to write, you have to stand up to live. You have to travel, you have to meet people, you have to engage with other cultures, you have to see the world. So it is important for an author, and I discovered that right at the beginning of my writing career, to actually travel a lot, meet a lot of people, engage with different cultures, find out as much about, as I could about other cultures. And then the loneliness begins, in a sense that you have to then sit down and actually write. There's no, I mean, a lot of people go to creative writing courses and, learn to write, which is true, they should, but there's no substitute for sitting down to write. Once you have something to say, once you have seen things, and you have some of your own ideas, then you sit down to write. And that's a very lonely, long process. Sometimes in my writing life, I've sat up to 10 hours in front of a computer. Before that, I learned to type on a manual typewriter, which I used to lug around with me. And then after the manual typewriter came an electronic typewriter, a little Olivetti that I used to take around with me before all the computers arrived. To some extent, I still type very, very hard on the keyboard because I was trained in a manual typewriter. And in the kind of 80s and 90s, when we had these kind of heavyweight portable computers that I used to lug around. I broke many keyboards because I was just typing too hard in that sense. So yes, writing involves a lot of thinking, a lot of kind of reflection in front of a black paper or nowadays blank screen. I essentially write with 5 or 6 different styles. You see, I write scholarly books, I write what are known as trade books, which are kind of meant for wide public. I write documentary films, I write guidebooks, I write textbooks. So the important thing to realize is that every genre, every way of writing is like a craft. You have to learn the craft. Imagine like if you want to become a potter, for example, you don't just start throwing clay, on a wheel. You have to learn how to become a potter. It takes time. So writing is a bit like that. It's a craft, and each different kind of writing. I mean, those people who write fiction have a different kind of craft than the kind of books that I write, like travel books or intellectual books for wider audience. So you have to learn it as a craft, and you got to be, in the beginning, you got to be humble and essentially start writing, with short stuff before book reviews, short articles before you actually kind of think of writing a book. A book is a pretty sophisticated thing to write. It does involve a lot of time and a lot of hard work. I mean, one of my books, for example, Mecca, the Sacred City, took 20 years of gestation before it was all complete in my head and I could actually sit down and write it. So hopefully this will help some budding writers, but I would recommend especially those folks living in England, those who want to write, is to get in touch with Critical Muslim, the journal that I edit, which is a kind of a combination of an intellectual and a literary magazine, comes out quarterly. And we encourage young writers and we help them kind of to write.
Is it true that you have to be disciplined?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, when you're sitting down to actually write, you have to be very, very disciplined. I normally write in London, when I'm in London, in my attic, and nobody's allowed to come in when I'm writing. And my family knew that. They would not disturb me when I'm writing, or they would not come and rearrange my books. Essentially, you have to be very disciplined, but at the same time, you have to be a bit more relaxed when you go out. I mean, when you go out and meet people, engage with people, a lot of ideas come through engagement. When you talk to people, you explore their ideas, you question them, you question your own ideas. And unless you kind of have this process going, which can be disciplined and can be undisciplined, it can be fun, it can be serious, it can be entertaining, it may not be entertaining. Once you kind of have that, then the discipline comes in. And once you work it all out in your mind, then the real discipline starts of actually sitting down to write.
Oh, we have a question from the audience. Do we need to travel far to get our material? I guess it depends what we want to write about. If we want to write about ourselves and our communities, we can travel to our doorstep. But more importantly, we need to be deeply reflective. Just a thought that was.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thought. Of course, it depends on what you want to write. I mean, if you want to write about your family, then you're engaging with your family. But the skill required still, I would say, the skill needed requires you to have a broad mind, right? How you phrase your sentences, how the book is structured. All that requires some serious thought, which you may not get if you just engage with your family and you want to write about the family, in a sense. So I would recommend certain amount of travel, even if the travel involves going from one city in UK to another city. It's surprising how the culture changes from London to Manchester, for example, or Manchester to Liverpool, and Edinburgh is then again quite different. and just kind of engaging with people and talking to people. You get lots of ideas of how you're going to structure, certain paragraphs, how you're going to structure certain thoughts when you actually write them. So engagement with other people, I think, is very, very important. Even if you want to write something about, say, as you don't have to go out the door if you're writing about the family.
And I've known of some people who have some special rituals before they start writing or when they start writing.
Yes. Do
you have any?
Yes, I do. Actually, I'll tell you later on. This has to do, with very much with the discipline of writing. So if you're sitting down for about, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours, struggling with a white screen or white sheet of paper, you do need things that can distract you, but don't distract you, if you know what I mean. So I had a colleague who often chewed his pencil. Even though he was not writing with a pencil, he always had a pencil, and he chewed his pencil when you're trying to write. So the pencil will start off, by the time he's finished the day, the pencil will be half the size. I smoke cigars. So I would always have a cigar on the go particularly when I'm doing trying to work out some knotty problem that I want to analyze or explain, or just I'm thinking for myself in a kind of very deep way. But different people have. I mean, another one of my colleagues used to eat chocolate all the time. I work for London Week in Television, and I had to co-write scripts with some of my colleagues, and they had all had some sort of kind of habit going to help them, as it were, concentrate. Some chewed a lot, constant chewing of the gum and so on and so forth. It's basically, I think, a mechanism for reducing anxiety. Because nothing makes you more anxious when you have a great deal to say. You don't know how you're going to say it, and you're looking at a blank screen. You've got to write something, right? The thoughts are jumbled in the head. You need to give them some structure. You need to put them on the paper. How do you begin? And one of the most difficult things to write is the first sentence. I spent quite a long time thinking about it before I actually sit down to write. And the first sentence probably is the sentence that I give the most thought to, because you want to attract the reader with your first sentence, with whatever the reader reads initially has to be engaging for the reader to continue reading right towards the end. So the first sentence has to be very, very critical, and you have to give it a lot of thought. And the last sentence is just as critical, because right at the end, you want the reader to be wanting more, even though you can't supply that. You want the reader to wanting more. So, for example, one of my best-known books, Desperately Seeking Paradise, ends with the words, "and that's another story." So I'm telling numerous stories, and right at the end, the conclusion, "that's another story." And so many people had asked me, what is that story? Right? Of course, when I wrote it, there was no story. Now, 20 years after the publication, over 25 years after the publication of the book, there are lots of other stories I can tell. But the idea is to give them something more to think about, to be wanting more. So my book, Balti Britain, ends with the words, "and the best is yet to be." You see, again, it leaves the reader wanting to know what is this best, which has not arrived yet. So you got to give considerable amount of thought to the beginning and the end of what you're writing. And of course, the structure. Most people find it very difficult to structure the book. The structure is the most important thing. I don't write fiction, so I won't talk about fiction, but in non-fiction writing, structure can either make or break a book.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Our host is now with us, Ismael. I'm going to hand over to him. Ismael, you're muted at the moment.
Thank you very much. And as we all know, life happens sometimes. So yeah, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. And thank you, Professor Dr. Zia. I wanted to ask Professor Zia, out of the 50 books that you have written and edited, which ones would be your favorite and why?
Well, the simple answer is my favorite book is the one that I'm writing at this moment. And I think most writers will tell you that the favorite book has to be the one they're writing at that moment. I can't tell you what I'm writing at the moment because if I start talking about it, I know it will never be written. So I want to write it first before I tell you about it. But I can tell you that my favorite book at the moment is the one that I'm writing. However, if you pressed me more, then I will say Mecca, the Sacred Histories is probably my favorite books of the books that I've written. Because it's combination of travel, history, culture criticism, has quite a certain amount of humor in it. But perhaps most of all, it presents a perspective on Mecca that most people do not know. Most people do not know, for example, I mean, we tend to think Mecca, it's a sacred city, sanctuary, the Haram, the Hajj, the Umrah, and all that. This is the city where the Prophet was born. It's a very holy city for us. Therefore, it will be a very cool, calm, collective, and a wonderful place. But throughout history, Mecca has been a pretty violent city. It has a very violent history. And we have a very romantic notion of the city. And what I wanted to do is to kind of pierce through that romanticism and show the city as it really was, and then deliver the kind of the final punch, if you like, to show how the city is now and what a state it is in. So I would say that is Mecca, the Sacred City is my favorite book.
Okay. As a British professor and scholar of Pakistani heritage, an intellectual, a cultural critic, an author who specialized in Muslim thought, future of Islam, futurology, science and cultural relations, what would you say would be your favorite accolade and why?
Favorite accolade? No, I just like to be known as a writer and thinker. I was a public intellectual, but I think to be a public intellectual, you have to be in the public eye. And I was very much in the public eye, say in the 80s when I used to work for television, or the 90s and the noughties when I was writing columns for various newspapers. I was a columnist on the New Statesman. I did lots of public lectures, went to the book festival. But for the last about 10 years, I've kind of withdrawn. I don't really like to be in public very much. I just want to spend the life that is left thinking and reflecting and helping young people, helping marginalized communities think about their future. So I wouldn't describe myself as a public intellectual now. So I will just say that I'm a writer and a thinker and a futurist, because I do a lot of my work is based on future studies.
And how would you define futurology?
Well, futurology is not perhaps the right term. The right term is future studies, because the emphasis is on futures and on studies. Futures, to point out, there's no one thing as a single future. There's no the future. There are lots of futures. And studies, because it involves interdisciplinary stuff, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary approach. So future studies is a very systematic and disciplined kind of exploration of the future. What is lurking over the horizon? How do you analyze trends? What are the emerging issues that may be coming up over the next 5 or 6 years? And the studies is very disciplined. It's part science, part intuition, part art.
And what's the definition of the term PTN?
Oh, PTN is an acronym for post-normal times. Now, post-normal times is a theory that I've developed over the last 10 years. It's a theory of change that emphasizes the fact that change itself is changing, right? And if you, for example, if you look at how change is accelerating, how things are happening faster and faster and faster, right? We live in a very interconnected world where things are happening very, very, very quickly. Now, you can send a tweet that will go to millions of people instantly, who can then reply or not reply. I mean, that level of communication and that level of speed was not kind of known before. And we know that social media, other kind of technologies are running away, developing very, very fast. Things are happening in the world at a very, very rapid pace. So speed plays a very, very important time on how things are changing, but also scale and scope. So you take that tweet not only reaches the whole world, just like the kind of webinar we are doing, but it also reaches the scale of the individual. It's a very famous example of a woman who was a communication director for a big multinational company. She got on the plane, I think somewhere in Los Angeles or maybe even New York. I can't remember. This is a reasonably old case. When I say reasonably old, in over time, 4 or 5 years are very old. So she was going to Johannesburg, and she tweeted, "I am going to South Africa. I hope I don't get AIDS. Haha," or words to this effect. I'm joking, but yeah. By the time she had arrived in Johannesburg, there were literally millions of people abusing her on Twitter. She arrived to a mass kind of gathering outside, and within a couple of weeks she was sacked. So how fast things move. So only three years ago, Greta Thunberg was not known. Nobody knew her. She was standing outside the parliament on her own with a little thing. Yeah, today she's a kind of a global phenomenon. Think of how quickly, for example, Malala Yousafzai, who was shot by the Taliban, left, came to England, and within 18 months, she spoken to the UN, she had published an autobiography, she had received a Nobel Prize, right? And now, of course, she became a global icon. So things move very, very fast. They reach out at global level, they touch the lives of individuals. But there's one other important thing. They tend to happen simultaneously. So we don't have one crisis. We have a number of crises appearing at the same time. The best way to realize is look at the hurricanes. You would have one hurricane a year or 2 hurricanes a year in a region. Now you could have 3 or 4 hurricanes coming simultaneously. Yeah. So the 4 S's are changing change and actually changing the nature of change. Speed, scope, scale, and simultaneity. This is what we call the 4 S's of post-normal times. That is a time that is not normal anymore, where what we took for granted does not exist anymore, or is slowly seeping away. Now, what are the consequences of these 4 S's? We live, as I said, we live in a very interconnected world. Right? In an interconnected world, with speed changing, things going, moving at an accelerating pace. We have complexity. The world is very complex and very interconnected. Now, it's important to realize what is complexity. Right? We are not talking about complicated things. Complicated things was like my mother, God bless her, when she was alive, every year, wintertime, she'll bring out her little basket of cotton wool to knit a new sweater for somebody, right? And all the wool will be jumbled up, and then she spent all this time trying to unknot it and sort it all out, and all sweaters will be taken down and all that. So she's kind of unknotting the knot. It took a long time. That's a complicated problem that can be solved. A complex issue is different. A complex system has a number of different variables that are independent, that can change at any time, right? You know, and not just they can change at any time. They also kind of have a feedback loop that, especially if things are changing rapidly, could have a feedback loop that leads to chaos. What do I mean by chaos? I mean chaos, order without periodicity. It's a sort of strange phenomena that emerges, right? Which it's a chaotic behavior. It doesn't have any periodicity. It's non-linear, right? In the sense. Sorry, I meant disorder without periodicity. So we have complexity and chaos. And another thing that we see in the world at this moment is there are lots of contradictions about it, which is not surprising, because if you have a complex system, different people pulling each other in different direction, right? You'll have lots of contradictions, and contradictions enhance complexity, and then complexity takes us to the edge of chaos. That's an excellent example of chaotic event is, of course, the pandemic. And you notice how many things is stopped, right? Stops us shopping, stops us traveling, stops us meeting family members, right? It stopped air travel. It had a major impact on the economy. Right? It had a major impact on the psychology of people. That's apart from the fact that it kills a lot of people became sick. And if you look at the photographs of, for example, the Hajj during pandemic, there are only like a couple of hundred people there. Well, on average during the Hajj, we'll have 2.5 up to 3 million people. Right? So what PNT or post-normal times theory argues is that we find ourselves in an in-between period where the old systems, institutions, paradigms, ways of thinking, ways of doing have not quite died, but they don't work. And the new ones have not emerged to take their place. So we are trapped between the no longer and the not yet, in a sense. It's not the end point, it's this transitional period. How do we adjust to complexity? You see, how do we deal with climate change? Now, the number of things that are on the horizon that will increase the post-normal nature of our period. For example, climate change. 10 years ago, when I used to give a lecture on future, I used to say, you know, it's climate change is coming. Climate change is coming. Today, of course, it's not coming. It has arrived. We are living through climate change at this moment in time. It will have a devastating effect. And it will have a profound effect on Muslim societies as well, because the Muslim countries are essentially occupy the global middle belt. That's why we used to call them the middle belt country, the global middle belt. And that's where some of the major impact will be of climate change. And at this moment in time, 2 out of 3 refugees in the world are Muslim. But a whole new class of refugees is emerging. Think of the Maldives. You see, the Maldives is sinking. Within 10 years, it will be all underwater. Where will the population of the Maldives go? So we have a whole new generation of environmental refugees. And these environmental refugees will be mostly Muslim. So within the 5-10 years, 4 out of 5 refugees in the world will be Muslim. Right? And that's quite a frightening thought. Right? And that's what post-normal times theory is all about, is to show that, look, these problems are coming. But it's not just that these problems are coming. We have to think of the potential way to navigate these problems. Now, the thing about post-normal times is that when you have a complex, chaotic system, you can't control and manage it. The whole function of chaos, it has no periodicities, no patterns, so you can't predict, right? So you have to navigate it. So post-normal times is about navigation. How are we going to navigate our way out of what is emerging into something new? And we have no idea what that something new is. But many things are happening, like artificial intelligence, already taking over most of our lives. most of the victims of artificial intelligence are Muslims. Think of the Uyghurs, how the entire nation of Uyghurs, have been racially profiled, followed, and then persecuted using artificial intelligence. Or think of bioengineering. Right? Already we have about 5 or 6, 7 years ago, we had CRISPR, which is a way of editing DNA, which is not all that sophisticated. Now we have even better tools that you can buy on the internet to biohack yourself or others, if you so wish, right? And think of the potential of eugenics, right? That bioengineering presents. Already in India, people will go to the doctors and say, I want my baby to look white as milk. And it can be done.
No way.
It can be done. But in 10 years' time, they could say, I want my baby to have an IQ of 160. I wanted the eyes to be like that, nose to be like that. And all that would be possible. Yet at the same time, we have no notion of how to handle things. These are very sophisticated problems that are lurking, just over the horizon, 5, 6, 10, maximum 10, 15 years. Right? So we have not just to start thinking about them, but we have to start finding ways to navigate our way out of them. And most of these problems involve ethics. They are ethical problems, right? And at the end of the day, Islam is all about ethics, right? So it presents us with a challenge.
What does intervention have any does it have a place? Are there any plans for any intervention of these things?
You see, for example, you take climate change. The intervention would be we stop using fossil fuels. Right? I mean, the scientists have been predicting it's no point calling it climate change. We now call it climate emergency. Scientists have been predicting this for the last 60 years. So it's not something that we did not know. We knew it was coming systematically, right? Yet, again, some of the countries that produce most of the fossil fuels are Muslim countries. Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Nigeria, etc. So we are adding to the problem ourselves in that sense. And the intervention will be to take climate change very, very seriously and do something about it. The intervention for artificial intelligence will actually develop artificial intelligence that enhances humanity, not reduces the human being or makes human beings relevant and allows robots and AI to take over the world. Right? So we need to develop our own artificial intelligence that is actually ethically based, which is not a major problem. But the question is we need to be aware of it and then engage in the problem itself.
So what do you say to those who reject or they called climate change deniers? That I had a meeting with one the other day, and he was saying that the planet Earth always goes through a cycle of climate whereby it's hot for a couple of decades, then it goes cold for a couple of 100 years, then it goes hot again. I said, this is just human nature, and the climate change people are just, what's it called, scaremongering. What would you say to people like this?
Well, I will not hesitate to call them fools. I mean, any more than all those who denied COVID and denied that COVID-19 doesn't exist. So in post-normal time theory, we have what we call the phenomena of post-normal lag. That is when something is right in front of you, but you refuse to accept it. When a crisis, something like climate change or some of the technology that is coming in front of you, that is going to have very disruptive effect, and you ignore it. We call it the lag. It is the post-normal lag. But post-normal lag does not stop what we call post-normal creep. The problem continuing to creep towards you. right? So you can deny climate change or whatever else you want to deny, but it's like gravity. You jump up a high-rise building, you're going to have a very messy landing, right? So the creep continues till you reach a point where the phenomena starts pushing you. So climate change is now pushing, it's tilting us, it's forcing us in a chaotic position, right? And eventually you have the burst, which is the full chaotic phenomena. So for example, continue with climate change. We are now at a tilt position where the climate change is beginning to have major impact around the globe, right? There is absolutely no doubt if it continues and we continue to increase the temperature to 1.5, it'd be a massive, serious problem. Already, for example, the Bangladesh, Deccan Basin is disappearing. As I said, the Maldives is disappearing. Or most of Western Europe is on fire. Right? This July has been the highest recorded July temperature in history. Right?
Wow.
Never, 3 days ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations said we are now have reached a boiling point. It's like not climate change, but boiling climate, or somewhat. I can't remember the exact words he used. Right? So, I mean, deniers will exist. See, the deniers exist at the time of the Prophet. Deniers will exist. That's part of the, if you like, human community. In any community, you will have all types of people. People on the left, people on the right, people in between. People of numerous sects, people who will deny this, people who will not deny this. But at the end of the day, you have to be rational and reasonably objective. The Quran tells us to use reason again and again and again to study stars, universe, clouds, everything, objectively. I mean, 720 verses in the Quran are devoted to reasoning. For some, there is a reason behind this reasoning, and that is you've got to be sensible, and look at science.
Talking of reasoning, what's your take on polarization in society and cancel culture in today's world? Do you think?
I mean, it's a part of the contradictions. The contradictions are kind of increasing and increasing and increasing, right? We are facing more and more contradictions. Now, the problem with contradictions is that they cannot be resolved, especially if they are too logically opposite. So no matter what position you take, right, you're going to be partly right and partly wrong. So we need to learn. That's the way of navigating post-normal times. We've never had so many contradictions in history as we face today, right? I mean, look at the British politics. It's full of contradictions. Social media, fake news. How do you differentiate fake news from real news? There's a contradiction. Deep fake from real video. How do you know that we are real, right? I mean, we could be deep fake, right?
Yeah, true.
Right. So the world is full of contradictions, and the contradictions are increasing. So we have to learn to transcend the contradictions, and that requires coming together and appreciating difference in perspectives and so on and so forth. I'll give you a very controversial example, right? Very controversial. Transgender women. Are transgender women or not? Both answers are correct. Strictly speaking, if you analyze, both answers are correct. So no matter what answer you give, you're going to upset somebody. So we need to find a way of transcending this. I mean, we need a whole new language, right? To transcend these contradictions. Otherwise, we just be fighting each other. Right? It's essentially we find ourselves in a classical kind of philosophical quandary that, when I was learning philosophy, they used to give this question: have you stopped beating your wife? Well, if you say yes, that means you were beating her. Not a good thing. If you say no, then you continue to beat her, right? So you're in a quandary. There's no real, it's not a question. So we are facing questions which are not questions in that sense. You can't give, in a complex world, there are no yes and no answer. Everything is nuanced. Everything is delicate. Everything needs to be balanced in that sense. How do we do that? Right? That's what we got to do. What is cancel culture? Cancel culture is just one reaction to all this. It's just a way of saying, I am right or you are wrong, right? The non-cancel culture is the other thing. It's saying, you are right and I'm wrong in that sense. So we need to just go beyond that. It's going to be very, very painful for us. And I'm now talking about humanity as a whole, because all of us find ourselves in a new place. Somebody put down Shruja's cat. Yes, we don't know. Is the cat dead or alive? When you look at it, when you look at her, maybe she's alive. When you open the cage, as it were, she's dead. I mean, that's we're kind of, and that uncertainty principle kind of arena in a global sense.
So in 2023, how important or irrelevant would you say critical thinking is needed?
But I just said, post-normal times requires, for example, you to transcend contradictions. That requires critical thinking. How are you going to transcend contradictions if you can't think and you can't think critically? And here, all of us, I mean, critical thinking is not something that's a luxury for some people, some people in our ivory tower teaching at universities or lecturers or professors. It's something that we all need to learn, no matter who we are, plumbers, doctors, students, children, because take children and social media. They have to be critical with what they see and how they engage with it, or they will be in trouble. So critical thinking is not a luxury anymore. It used to be. Then when I was a culture critic, teaching criticism, I taught criticism for several years. Fine, it's good for MA students to learn some critical thought. But now I think in post, as we kind of come closer and closer to post-normal times, it becomes very important for us to be critical. Now, there are two ways of being critical. I can be very critical of you, right? And I can say you're a very bad rapper, right? You're a disaster, right? I did not enjoy myself when you were rapping. Now that's
my wife would agree. My wife would agree.
That would go down as criticism, but it doesn't actually do anything. It just disparages you. That's not criticism. You see, that's disparaging, that's abuse, or whatever you like, whatever you like. And that's what most people think, when they see a film, I didn't like it, or it was so bad, or this, that. The function of criticism is to take something from one place and place it at a higher place. Is to raise its level by bringing thought into it, showing people how does this problem, this film, this situation, how does it enhances our life or does not enhance our life? What does it teach about? It teaches about culture, about ourselves, about metaphysics. So no matter how bad a rapper you are, I can critique you and take you to a much higher level, which will benefit you, which will benefit me, which will benefit everybody around. So that's the kind of criticism that we need, you see. And people do not know. People often, if you see, for example, my book, Desperately Seeking Paradise, is subtitled Journeys of a Skeptical Muslim. So people automatically assume that because it's a journeys of a skeptical Muslim, I'm skeptical about Islam, or I'm not a believer, or whatever. But what I'm actually saying is that I'm looking at Islam as a critic. I'm critically engaging with Islam so I can learn, but at the same time, maybe I can take your understanding of Islam from here and take it up, place it at a higher level. And I would hope that when people have read the book, that's what happens to them. They have a much broader appreciation of Islam and the shortcomings of the Muslim people, which the book is also about.
Yeah,
It's also, by the way, one critic described it as the most humorous book in Islam he ever read. So it's also quite funny.
yeah, and as human beings, we critique ourselves as well, and our partners and loved ones. So I'm assuming it's with the same microscope, the way how we critique each other, so we can become better people.
Yes, yes.
As a world-renowned professor and academic, you've traveled and you lectured at numerous cities, numerous universities, numerous countries. Which country would you say was the most inspirational and breathtaking, where you gave a lecture or in your travels around the world? And why?
And why? Okay, that why is important. The most breathtaking city is definitely Istanbul. I've lectured there a lot. And I found, a great deal of inspiration from Istanbul. But I'd say that the place I've enjoyed lecturing most is Kuala Lumpur. I've kind of had a love affair with Malaysia for a long time, going back like 30, 40 years. So I've been coming here regularly. In the 80s, I used to do what were known as intellectual discourses in those days, where you brought in civil servants, educationalists, professors, students, and you discussed a particular intellectual problem, in an open and kind of a honest way. Whether it's a problem of Islam, problem of Sharia, or fiqh, or some contemporary issue, etc., etc. And I enjoyed that very lot, a great deal. And now we are doing some futures-oriented workshops here, where we teach young people how to think about the future and how to bring futures techniques and methods into their own work, including in their own life, how they think about their own life, and also kind of making them aware of post-normal times theory and what, how that can be used for the, both to enhance their understanding of the world around them and the changes that are taking place, and also to kind of find ways and methods of navigating the, the kind of tsunami of change that we are facing. So Kuala Lumpur, I would say, I'm probably more inspired in Istanbul, but Kuala Lumpur is the city that I enjoy most in lecturing and talking to people.
Before I go to questions in the chat, I wanted to ask, as someone who's lived in the UK and as an academic again, and you mentioned it earlier with regards to migration and immigration of people, of refugees who are coming to the UK. At least, you're saying at least 2/3 now are Muslim, and in the future it will be 4/5.
I'm talking about, no, I was saying on the 2/3 of all the refugees in the world are Muslim.
All the refugees are Muslim, yeah. So, okay, so I can't say the statistics are coming to the...
And I lost you there for a sec. I lost you, so you have to kind of restate the question.
Okay, so that's okay, I'll stop in the beginning. Due to xenophobia and Islamophobia growing in the UK, and in most Western countries, when I travel to Europe, America, Canada, xenophobia and Islamophobia is a growing issue.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, what part can British Muslims, Western Muslims play in tackling xenophobia and Islamophobia in communities?
And that's a kind of question, I think, that requires a very long and complicated answer. Let's begin with a very simple fact. The function of the European Union, when the European Union was formed, was to ban fascism and Nazism forever. Never again was the slogan, right? That was the function of the European Union, apart from all the economic cooperation, etc., etc. But now, a sizable proportion of the European parliamentarians come from a fascist party or fascist parties, right?
Oh my gosh.
We thought that fascism ended, after the Second World War, but it has come back in a big way, right? And now here we are not just talking about about European or white fascism, if you like. There's also fascism in India, the Indian Hindu fascism, Hindutva, right? They want to wipe out the entire history of Islam from the Indian subcontinent. Yeah, it's not just good enough to destroy mosques, right? They want to rewrite all history books and just remove even the Taj Mahal is being questioned, right? And of course, other parts of the world. I mean, we saw the xenophobia again, or Islamophobia in Myanmar with the Rohingyas, and also the Uyghurs in China, right? So we now find ourselves in a very different position, and the contradictions to what the West actually, let us assume it stood for something, and the reality that is emerging, total contradiction. Contradiction between what the West says it believes and what the West is actually doing. Yeah. We look at America, would you ever imagine somebody like Trump will emerge and become a prime minister?
No way.
Would you in Britain, for example, could imagine that a habitual liar would be accepted as a prime minister and his word be accepted, right? So there's so many contradictions in the world, right? And this is the post-normal phenomena, which we have not experienced before. So what do you do? What do you do about, I mean, to some extent you have to fight xenophobia. There's no question. And in Britain, we are very fortunate. In Britain, we are very fortunate that we really do have a reasonably multicultural society. There's a lot of racism, but Britain is still a very multicultural society, say in contrast to France or Germany or Scandinavia. We don't have, fascists in the parliament. Well, okay, some conservative MPs come close, but they're not genuine fascists. So in Britain, we have a kind of we find ourselves in better positions than most Muslims find themselves in other European countries. We have to fight Islamophobia at every level. And here, I think we have to go back to the advice of the Prophet. How do you fight injustice? How do you fight oppression? If you can, you fight, you have proper struggle, or, you use your pen, you use social engagement. You can't do anything, then you have it in your heart. You hate the situation. So we have to fight Islamophobia at different fronts and simultaneously. Now that's the thing. See, in a complex problem requires complex approaches to handle it. And Islamophobia now has become a complex problem for Muslim societies. So we need complex approaches. We need different approaches, different levels of approaches to actually solve it. We cannot just, approach it one way and assume that we can handle it. Are you still there, Ismael?
I can't see him. I think he's logged out and he's going to be logging back in again. So
maybe we can go to the questions from.
I think that's a good idea. Let me just double check. We do have. Right, we've got one question from Nasheed. Why did you choose to settle in Malaysia?
I'm not settled in Malaysia, actually. I'm still very much settled in London. I've always lived in London. London is the place where I feel at home when I'm there. But I have been working in Kuala Lumpur on and off for a number of years. I just find the culture here, very relaxed. It's always sunny every morning. I get up, the sun is shining in London. I think I find winter very, very hard. But I'm still very much a resident of London. I spend half a year here and half a year there. but it will be wrong to say that I've actually settled in Kuala Lumpur. I love Kuala Lumpur. I love Istanbul. I've spent a lot of time there in Istanbul. I'd like to spend more time, time in Istanbul. So for me, the ideal life will be to spend 4 months in Kuala Lumpur, 4 months in Istanbul, and 4 months in London. Summer in London, winter in Kuala Lumpur, spring and autumn in Istanbul.
Okay. And we've got another question from the audience. You've mentioned that you can send messages very quickly now, which reach millions of people. So do books still have a place in today's world?
Books will always have a place in the world. I mean, there's a lot of things, about artificial intelligence, writing, short stories together. I think there's one case of someone got AI to write a script for a horror film. There's authors in America have got together to demand that AI produced products should be declared as just as we have food warnings on packages, we should have kind of AI warning on books and so on and so forth. But it really decent thought out work of scholarship or a work of a profound work of fiction can only be done by human beings, right? So there will always be a place for books. The ebooks became very kind of very trendy 5, 6, 7 years, 8 years ago. And now nobody wants to, who has a kind of Amazon Kindle? The people used to go around with them. I hardly see them anymore, right? People actually carry real hard books in their hand. Yes, the books will always be there. There'll always be writers. Of course, they will meet many challenges, but a humane work of scholarship, of history, of thought, of metaphysics, can only be written by human beings, no matter how intelligent the artificial intelligence is.
Thank you for this. We've got 2 questions from Umar. The first one is, can Muslim societies survive the changing nature of change? And the second one is, are there any P&T workshops online so that we can learn more about it?
The second question comes, let me answer the second question first. Unfortunately, there are no P&T workshops online. We did some workshops online during the COVID period, but frankly, I really enjoy physical, interaction with people, face-to-face interaction. So I really prefer, a proper workshop with people engaging with each other, and our workshop involve a lot of kind of working, on charts and drawing graphs and diagrams and plotting this and plotting that. So it's very unlikely that we will do online workshops. I'm sorry, I'm a bit old-fashioned. Some of my colleagues totally disagree with me, but I'm a bit old-fashioned in that. I really enjoy interacting with young people and doing so. But there are opportunities, and the opportunities can be created to have workshops in other places. We don't only have to do them in Kuala Lumpur, Istanbul, or London. We can also do them in other places. The second question was about, can Muslim societies survive this? I'm not sure. I'm not sure, because some of the changes that are coming are going to have a pretty major impact on Muslim societies. First of all, there's the existential impact. If the temperatures rise above 50, and that could happen in the next 2 or 3, 4 years, right? The temperatures, it will become quite impossible to live in certain, North African countries, or even in places like Pakistan. Life will be very, very difficult. So that actually the temperature rise, the rise of sea levels actually presents an existential threat, first and foremost to Muslim societies and Muslim countries. The second is, I think the emergence of artificial intelligence and bioengineering is quite concerning for me. I don't think we are ready for the onslaught that we are about to face. So I'm not, I wouldn't say, I'm cautiously pessimistic, if you say, about can the Muslim society really survive the change. Unless we really open our eyes and start doing something about the kind of the complex issues we face and start to learn to navigate them, I think we are going to be in deep trouble.
Thank you so much for this. We've got another question. What do you make of the death of Sinead O'Connor and the response of Muslims to it, especially of the conservative Muslims claiming her for themselves post-conversion?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I'm not heavily into pop music, so I can't quite comment on that. I did know that she was a Muslim. I did read somewhere that she was going through a depressive period, etc., etc. So I can't quite comment on that, apart from saying that it's sad that she died so young, and haven't been following what's going on in Britain. You know, conservative Muslims always claim converts. That doesn't make, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's not necessarily a good thing. I mean, when Yusuf Islam became converted to Islam, or Cat Stevens converted to Islam, became Yusuf Islam, a lot of conservative Muslims claimed him, and he did a lot of things that in those days, I mean, somebody involved in the Rushdie affair, didn't appreciate. But that's the variety of Muslims. In a sense, we got to learn to accept that there will be people from all angles and all perspectives and all views in our group, and we just have to learn, to appreciate this and move on. I mean, not make a big issue out of it. I think we have much bigger problems to pay our attention to.
Thank you so much. We've addressed all the questions in the Q&A portal, and I just started moving over to the ones in the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Ismael again. You're muted.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much. Basically, I'm going to do one here. On a scale of 1 to 10, how high would you state the threat of AI to Islamic scholarly works?
This is quite interesting. Probably 5 or 6, not very high. If you notice, if you go to ChatGPT and ask him some question about Islam, the answer that often comes in is that you should consult Muslim scholars, and I think there's a reason. There's a reason for that. In many ways, many Islamic issues are very kind of human dependent, right? Why is that we still need to see the moon visually in the age of, science and computers and prediction and so on and so forth? Because the human element is very, very important. Of course, we know exactly when the new moon will arrive, right? But actually, in getting the human involved in the observation and the new moon is also very, very important. It's a very trivial example, but in many ways, interpretation is essentially a human exercise. And if you're asking questions about, Quranic interpretation or the meaning of hadith, is the best place to go to a scholar or find a scholarly work. So I don't quite see, a great deal of threat from artificial intelligence on Muslim scholarship in that sense. And anyway, I don't see any threat from AI on scholarship per se, right? The AI is not going to write a new history of, say, Alexandria, or AI is not, I mean, what it will write will be, kind of gathered from what already exists. There'll be no original, research involving manuscripts and going to the library and digging out, old scrolls, etc., etc. I mean, so we shouldn't be too afraid that AI will take some of our creative aspects, but we should be afraid that AI could be used to control, manage, and manipulate us. Right? We already seen the effect of AI on the Uyghurs in China, in a sense. We already seen how AI is used to profile Muslims, in airports and railway stations and other places. So it does represent a serious threat to us. But I think at the end of the day, creativity is essentially a human virtue, or if you like, a human thing, right? And I don't see the AI is going to be, take over the creativity of original thinkers and original artists. Yeah, it can copy art when it already exists, and it can produce some stuff. But the real original artists, they cannot be replaced. The real original, writers of great literatures cannot be replaced. The real thinkers, great scholars cannot be replaced, and they will be around, and more will come to the fore.
Okay. With regards to sectarian issues, do you think that we're living in an age now where, due to the rise of Islamophobia, that this has forced Muslims from different sects and denominations to find ways of working together who wouldn't really work together 10, 15 years ago?
Yes and no. I mean, I don't really see Muslims around the world working together. Maybe partly true in Britain. I think that Muslim groups are coming much more together now than they did 10, 15 years ago. But we also need a kind of much broader global kind of collaboration of Muslim scholars, thinkers, governments, regional cooperation and so on and so forth. That is actually not happening. There's still a lot of sectarianism out there among Muslim societies, which is a shame, because essentially what sectarianism is a claim that my sect or my notion of truth is absolute. That, that my knowledge, is perfect. Nobody can say that, right? Yeah, a text like Quran, that's by definition an eternal text, will have many interpretations. None of them will be totally right. None of them will be totally wrong, right? None of them could possibly be described as absolute and final interpretation. So of course we would have, we have sects. We've always had sects. So what's the problem? Why do we see a different sex as an issue? You see, it's essentially an issue of self-confidence. Because we do not have self-confidence in our own interpretation, that we feel that the interpretation of others is wrong. Right? And unfortunately, given the kind of trends and what's going on globally, the likelihood is that sectarianism will increase rather than decrease. And the only way to decrease it is to open Muslim societies up to different thoughts, different perspectives. It's not a question of teaching them true Islam. It's more a question of teaching them that Islam is bigger than their tent, that small tent that they find themselves in. That it's a universal religion. A universal religion, by definition, will have, numerous interpretations. And that's something we have not achieved throughout our history. And certainly, I don't see it much progress in that direction. I mean, I'm astonished and appalled sometimes by the sheer sectarianism that I find in most Muslim countries.
Oh, that's a shame. And another question that I got is, according to your scholarly works and your understanding, what is your view of places like the Bermuda Triangle? Do you
I don't believe in them. Let's move on.
Okay, that's good. All right, so then we got two questions that are relating to AI. So I'm going to ask them as one question. One person asked, can AI ever become conscious with extensive training? The second part is, what would be the Islamic view on sentient AI? What point would it be classed as a living being?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, in a sense, what is the essential element that makes us human at the end of the day, right? What makes us who we are, right? Apart from
our spirits.
Ruh, right? In a sense. So the question to ask is, can AI have ruh? If it can have ruh, then it can be sentient, right? Then it can have consciousness. Now, I don't believe any machine can have ruh. So as long as it cannot have ruh, because only God gives ruh, right? And only God gives ruh to his creations, right? And I would say that, no, I don't believe that AI would ever be sentient. Yeah. That doesn't mean that AI would not do what it's programmed to do and destroy the world. I mean, there's a very good the paperclip paradox, where one philosopher did this kind of mental experiment where the AI was asked to make paper clips, you know, and just that is its job forever, to make paper clips. So it made paper clips and turned the human beings and the earth and everything into paper clips. That it can do, but that doesn't mean it has consciousness. You see, we had a long scientific debate on what is consciousness and what is consciousness, what is not consciousness. We've had long philosophical debates going back to Plato and all that. And these debates will continue because they don't have a fixed answer in that sense. But the way I look at it, what makes me human is the ruh. Otherwise, I'm just a body. Ruh is something that God breathes in me, right? If God breathes ruh in an AI, then it will be, you know, sentient and conscious. But I don't believe that God will breathe ruh in an AI.
Okay, that breaks it down with so much clarity. Another question is, do you have any comments about the end of times? Do you see any signs of the last days, or is it not quite the time to be thinking of such scenarios?
Okay. Now, there are two or three hadiths that one can quote here. One of my favorite hadiths is that the Prophet said that if you think the world will end tomorrow and you have a seed, plant it. Yeah, very simple hadith. Right? Let's think about this hadith for a little moment. Right? If you think the world is going to end tomorrow, so that's a thought. It may not actually end, but you may be right. So if you think the world is end tomorrow and you have a seed, plant it. What will the seed do when you plant it? It will grow and produce, eventually become a tree, you know, which is a very future-oriented activity. So that is actually telling you that even though you think the world is going to end tomorrow, it won't actually end tomorrow. Right? Plant the seed. Right? What you will need tomorrow is the shadow of the tree, the fruit of the tree, what the tree can deliver to you. Right? Now, if you look at the hadith like that, then this end of, you know, I mean, Muslims are obsessed with this ridiculous conspiracy theories. What do you think of Bermuda Triangle? I mean, that's almost an insulting question to ask. What do you think of Bermuda Triangle? Or, you know, what do you think of end of days? You know, all the eschatology that is kind of dominating the world. No, the end of the day will come. End of the world will come when our sun becomes, you know, supernova. and quite a billion years to go. However, we as human beings do face an existential threat at this moment in time for a number of reasons that I have described before, of which climate change is only one, right? And we have to think about that. You know, ultimately, God does not help those who do not help themselves. You know, in the prayer, God says, you come to me halfway and I will come to you, right? You have to, you know, learn to help ourselves. We have to learn to help ourselves. Right? And we are not going to do that by engaging in eschatological thought and thinking that the world is going to end tomorrow and we should sit back, you know, and pray. Right? Prayer, of course, is very, very important. But the Prophet said, trust in Allah, but tie your camel. Trust in Allah, we pray, we trust in Allah, right? But that is not good enough. You have to tie your camel as well, because if you trust in Allah and left the camel untied and went to do your business, when you return, the camel would have wandered off. Yeah. So you have to, you see, we kind of cite these hadiths just like that and say this. No, just you have to reflect and think about them. Just take a very simple hadith, you know, trust in Allah and tie your camel. How sophisticated it is and what it actually tells you. Right? When you actually think about it, it is teaching you to think about your future, really, realistically, objectively. Because tying your camel is a very objective exercise. It's not a theoretical kind of, you know, metaphysical thing in that sense. So you do need to learn to help yourself. We need to learn to help ourselves. If we learn to help ourselves, then God will help us, right? But if we just waste our time in this futile, you know, conspiracy theories, I mean, the internet is, Muslims go to internet and so many Muslim sites are just talking nonsense about how the world will end in Yajuj, Majuj, and, you know, and you know, God created, when God created the world, Syria was created first, and ridiculous things like that. All justified in all sorts of, you know, kind of from texts here and there. You just have to think a little rationally, for God's sake. Right? This sort of thing is destroying our society. You know, this sort of thing is polluting the minds of our young people. Our young people are our future resource. They are the people who are going to help us navigate the post-normal time and get to a period, right, which is saner, safer, more ecologically sound than the one that we find ourselves, more caring and compassionate, see, more sustainable, you know, genuinely a paradise on earth with more gardens, more green, in the sense. So we need our young people to be critical thinkers, not be involved in kind of, you know, ridiculous end of the world and conspiracy theories and all that nonsense.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you talk about the end of the world, which in the past a lot of the times was described as end of days or end of era, would you be more inclined into looking at it as the end of the planet because of everything we're doing to it? Or would you consider, for example, the time cycles and you know, when the movement of the sun that is called precession of the equinoxes, and you know, so many days within the era, and so when one era finishes, you've got the next one.
So it is I mean, it is the end of modernity, right? The mess that we find ourselves are essentially products of modernity and postmodernism. You take post-truth, right? First time in history, we don't believe, or we are asked not to believe in anything as an absolute truth, right? Starting from Plato to now, right? That's the product of post-normal times, of postmodernism. Postmodernism made truth relative, and it became almost absolute relative. It is, you know, what Julian, the Trump lawyer said, you know, it's not truth, it's not a fact, it's an alternative fact, or it's not truth, it's somebody's notion of truth in that, you know. So the first time in history, we find ourselves truth being knocked off from its pedestal of absoluteness. And that's never happened in history. So the kind of situation we find ourselves in are essentially a product of modernity and postmodernism, which are both Western product of Western ideology and Western notions of progress and civilization, etc., etc. So we certainly are reaching the end of modernity. There's no doubt about that. That's what post-normal times is all about. You see, when I say the old ways of thinking and doing or dying, what I actually mean is the old way, modern ways of doing, the ways of modernity and post-modernity, the ways of thinking, yeah, that the ways of building, the ways of, you know, development that modernity has introduced, you know, the whole kind of notions that postmodernism is introduced, they are dying. They have become the dominant kind of paradigm of the world. We all move in those paradigms. We imbibe them. The images that we imbibe are the images of modernity and postmodernism. The metaphors we use are the metaphors of modernity and postmodernism. But all of that is becoming irrelevant, right? All of that is becoming irrelevant. That's the end. So in that sense, if you mean by end of times, by end of modern times, which is also title of a Modern Times is also title of a Charlie Chaplin film, where it actually shows how we are becoming kind of slave to modernity. Then yes, you know, in one sense it is but we haven't really started the beginning of something new. So we are kind of trapped in a sense in between period. But it's also a big opportunities for Islam and Muslim countries, right? Because if we engage critically with the world, if we learn to navigate post-normal times, we can produce our own new paradigms. And if these paradigms are kind of, you know, healthy and sustainable, you know, then other people will also adopt them. So they could also become global paradigms. Right? But we need to think new. We need to learn new ways of doing things, new ways of, you know, new ways of working things out. You know, the old linear thinking is gone. Now we need to think in complex terms. And I said complex problems require complex solutions, right? We have to learn to I mean, in conventional terms, we now face more, there's probably more ignorance now than there ever has been in history. Yet there's also more knowledge now than there has been in history. So we have this major contradiction. We have to learn to live with uncertainties. There's a whole varieties of new uncertainties coming up, right? So that's the challenge. And I think that's the challenge for Muslim societies. That's the challenge for Muslim thinkers. But that's also a challenge for young Muslim people. This is the young Muslim people and the youth of the world who, in my opinion, tend to be more aware of these issues than the elder generation. That they are our resources. If we get them to think critically and engage with the world critically, then they may actually find a way to navigate us away from these post-normal times into a trans-normal period where we are over and above modernity and post-modernity into something that is far, you know, far more viable, far more sustainable.
It makes total sense. Thank you.
Yes. The last question that's in the chat is illiberalism,
yes, I'm having a problem as well.
Is it more common in Muslim states, as in absence of freedom to dissent, suppression of the media, elections, of dubious engagement in elections?
Yes and no. All these things listed are true, but illiberalism is just as common in say, America. I mean, think of the Trump lot. I mean, half of America is divided. Half are Trump supporters and half are not Trump supporters. And the Trump supporters are very illiberal in every sense of the word. Or think of India. right? 1.2 billion population, 700, 800, million Hindus. I suspect half of them support Hindutva, right? They cannot be described as liberal, right? Think of all the fascist parties that exist in Europe. Yes, there's democracy there, but fascism is there too, contradiction, right? And fascists cannot be described as liberal. 1/3 of France systematically votes for a fascist party, Le Pen, for the last 30 years. They cannot be described as liberal. So yes, there's a lot of illiberalism in Muslim countries, but there's equal amount in the West too. So there are no black and whites.
Amazing. Yes, so if there's any other questions, anyone else would like to answer, please say now.
You're asking me or you're asking?
I'm asking the audience.
Oh, the audience, okay.
Because all the questions have been asked. I'm just going to ask one last question.
Okay.
What role can intellectuals play into raising the consciousness of the Muslim community, Muslim communities?
Yeah, by engaging with them, by not assuming that the Muslim communities, are simple. They may be simple, but not simplistic, or they are not, even if they are not very educated, doesn't mean they are not thinking people. But engaging with Muslim communities on equal terms, teaching them critical thinking, teaching them future consciousness. Now, UNESCO has this thing called futures literacy, that it wants everybody, every secondary school to teach futures literacy, right? That is awareness of the future, and and maybe some methods of how to explore and study the future. I think intellectuals should go out into the community and become organic intellectuals, right? They should be part and parcel of the community, not be separate from the community, right? And where possible, they ought to be raising the future consciousness, promoting futures literacy in their communities, which is one reason why I consciously decided that I don't want to be a public intellectual anymore. I don't want to do any television. I don't want to do any radio. I haven't done a book festival for so many years. I just want to engage with young people wherever I can and kind of motivate them to think about the future, motivate them to think about, critically about their Muslim practices, think critically with Islam, to become critical thinkers. So most of my life nowadays is devoted to that. And I'm always fighting to find time to actually write. So there's a contradiction in my life as well. This is interesting. You see, as I said, when I'm in Kuala Lumpur, I want to be in London. I miss London. When I'm in London, I miss Kuala Lumpur. When I'm writing, I miss engaging with young people. When I'm engaging with young people, I miss writing, right? So my own life is full of contradiction. So here we go. We have to learn to live with them.
Yes. On that note, thank you very much, Professor, for your wonderful, engaging conversation. I've definitely learned some things in this conversation, some things I'm going to look into, especially what you said about the ruh. It's true, because many people are running around scared of AI, and you just broke it down perfectly. Does AI have a ruh? Does it have a spirit? And the answer is no. So yes, and there's many other things I've learned, and I'm sure many people in the chat have said that they've learned many things too. So I would like to thank you very much for your enlightening talk, enlightening conversation. And I know we'll be speaking after this, and I wish you all the best, and all the best to you and to your family and in Kuala Lumpur, and say hi to our cousins there in Malaysia, and God bless. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, wonderful talk. And thank you so much to Ismael for wonderful hosting today. We're getting a lot of thank you from the public. It was a wonderful event. and it was a pleasure to be here with you today. So a huge thank you to our audience for taking part, sending questions, sharing your thoughts. Do join us tomorrow on our last event. Stay connected to us on the newsletter, on social media, and yes, do join us tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. The office.
Thank you.